All right, good evening, everyone. This is the meeting of the Housing and Land Use Committee on today is uh, November, I'm sorry, November 12th, 2024. And we're happy to have a very full and robust slate of speakers tonight, speaking on various issues. Um, Many of them related to tenants' rights, but we have because we have a packed agenda here, I think it is best to get started. My name is Greg Alvarez. I'm a co-chair along with Melissa Minnick um, of this committee of Community Board 14. And so what I'd like to do is move ahead then with our first presentation this evening. And the first presentation will be we have three speakers here this evening, and they're all from New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal, or DHCR for short. And so our three speakers are BJ Kwan, who is in the Office of Rent Administration, and then we also have Tom Meneke and Brittany Taylor, who are senior attorneys in the Tenant Protection Unit, who will be speaking to us on all things related to their department specifically, and also specifically the Office of Rent Administration. So I understand if I heard correctly, Tom and Brittany are going to be the other reversed. I'm sorry. DJ is going to be starting us off, and so I will turn it over to you to begin our discussion this evening to speak about the Office of Rent Administration. Thank you for having us this evening, or thank you for being here this evening.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, let's see if this will start for me. I apologize. I'm dealing with a bit of a lag this evening. Hopefully everyone can see this without a problem. Anyway,
Yes, we can
thank you
see it.
very
Thank you.
much. Hello, my name is DJ Kwan, and I am the Director of the Borough Rent Offices in the Office of Rent Administration of the Division of Housing and Community Renewal, which is better known as DHCR. I am here this evening with my colleagues from the Tenant Protection Unit as well, Thomas and Brittany. Although the Office of Rent Administration and the Tenant Protection Unit are both part of DHCR, ORA has a slightly different function, which is separate and apart from the Tenant Protection Unit. So my portion of the presentation will focus solely on the function of the ORA, after which my colleagues will take over to talk more about TTU. Before I begin the presentation, I do need to tell you about one limitation, and that is I cannot really address issues pertaining to the reasoning behind changes to regulations or legislations or agency policy, and I am not authorized to discuss specific cases or addresses or related cases pending before our agency at this time. So my goal tonight is really to present you with a general information to help understand our basic function and how to access useful information and resources that we have. Thank you for your understanding, and without further ado, I'm going to begin by giving a very short introduction to the Office of Rent Administration, or better known as ORA. So ORA regulates rent-stabilized and rent-controlled apartments in privately owned buildings in New York City and the surrounding counties of Nassau, Rockland, and Westchester. Also the city of Kingston in Ulster County, which has been with us since a couple of years ago. Overall, we regulate over 45,000 buildings, or just about 1 million apartments statewide. Under the rent regulation, tenants have certain rights, such as the right to have their leases renewed, have their rent increased in accordance with the lawful limits, and to have essential services and repairs for their apartments. And in this matter, we function much like a court, where tenants, if they feel their rights are not being respected, can file a written complaint with evidence, at which point ORA will open a case and serve the complaint on the opposing party, in this case, an owner. And then owner is afforded an opportunity to file their response with their evidence to support their position. And ORA gathers information and evidence through this process until we have enough to issue a decision in writing, which is called an order. And the order can be appealed by either of the parties. Our most common cases include overcharge, leases, services, and major capital improvement. We also require owners to file annual rent registration forms reporting tenants' names, addresses, rent, and lease information. And this information is compiled into a computerized database. But because the rent registrations contain sensitive information, they are exempt from the Freedom of Information law. They can only be provided to the tenants and owners and their authorized representatives. And part of our work is to facilitate this access so that tenants and owners and their representatives can access our information. And also, we address any inquiries that the tenants and owners may have. There are several ways that we offer our services and information, and one of them is definitely our website. Our website, which is hcr.ny.gov, is where tenants and owners can access all of our written documents and applications. Tenants can also request their own rent histories through our website. Another way is through our informational offices called the rent offices. Tenants and owners can visit our rent offices to receive face-to-face assistance. And I will talk a little more about rent offices later on in my presentation. But we also have a centralized call center. It's called the Rent Info Line, and tenants and owners can call and receive real-time help through the telephone. And I would like to point out that for all of our interactions, we do also offer translation services free of charge. The website itself also has a machine translations for any in-person or over the telephone interaction. We do offer free interpretation services through our state-approved vendor. So anyone with limited English proficiency should never feel hesitant reaching out to us for help. And one last thing, because rent history requests are probably one of the most popular items, I would like to mention another route where tenants can request their rent histories, and that is through our online portal, which is portal.hcr.ny.gov. There are some recent changes that I would like to share with you this evening. So the first one is really popular question during summer months, and that is, what is the rent guideline adjustment for this year for the rent stabilized apartment? So the current rent guidelines adjustment, which went into effect on October 1st, for rent stabilized apartment in New York City, it is 2.75% for 1-year leases and 5.25% for 2-year leases. And second, there have been some really significant changes in rules regarding rent increases due to individual apartment improvement, better known as IAIs. The bulk of the change really have to do with how owners can apply to get rent increases from these. They don't affect tenants as much. It doesn't change a lot for tenants. But we do have this information in our updated materials to explain all of these changes. And I would really encourage everyone to check out our fact sheet number 26 and also the Operational Bulletin 2024-2, which has the full changes. And they're both available on our website. Thirdly, there is now a penalty for owners who fail to file the annual registration on time. There is a fine for every apartment not registered on time, for every month the registration remains delinquent. This has been a very strong incentive for the owners to register in a timely manner. So this year, the number of registration we received on time jumped from under 900,000 last year to over 1 million. We do have an informational document about this topic as well. That is Operational Bulletin 2024-1, and that too is found on our website. I would now like to talk a little bit more about our rent offices and how you can access ORA services through them. We have a total of 6 offices, 5 within the New York City, 1 in Westchester County. And you can see the office locations and phone numbers on this slide. And I want to take this opportunity to just point out a really helpful document. It's available on our Contact Us page, and it is called the Borough Rent Office Scope of Services. It describes literally all of the services that we provide through our rent offices, and also how to make an appointment for an in-person visit. Office locations and phone numbers are also found on the same document. It also tells you what documents are helpful to bring for any in-person visits. However, you can just call any of our offices to simply ask questions over the phone. These numbers are not just for making appointments. It's if you have a quick question, or if you're not sure where to start, you can call any of these offices during our office hours. And by the way, I did highlight the Brooklyn office, but tenants and owners are welcome to contact any of our offices, regardless of the location, and we will be happy to assist. Lastly, I would like to reiterate some of our resources, including our website, which is probably the easiest to access and probably most helpful as well. All of our printed materials, all of our applications, all in one place, and that is hcr.ny.gov. And the second, the phone numbers for our central informational call center, the rent info line, which is at 833-499-0343. While the rent info line is accessible 24 hours, our staff are only there during the office hours. So if you get a recording after hours, that is why. If you need assistance from one of our staff members, please call during the office hours. And once again, a reminder that portal.hcr.ny.gov is the easiest way to request rent histories. And many of our applications, the tenant applications, are actually available online through the Rent Connect. And Rent Connect's address is simply rent.hcr.ny.gov. And over at Rent Connect, you will also find Rent Connect Assistant. It's an automated service that will ask a series of questions and then provide a personalized guide based on the responses. Last but not least, we have also a referral page that is available from our website. And this page lists our partner agencies that may be of assistance even when we cannot. The links on this page are checked periodically so that they remain up to date. And I really encourage everyone to take advantage of that one. And that's all I have for this evening. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to my colleagues from Tenant Protection Unit, Thomas and Brittany. And if anyone has any questions for me, we will be able to address them after TPU's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DJ. Yes, so we will continue then with DHCR's presentation, and then afterwards, there will be an opportunity for questions, excuse me, either in the chat or by raising your hand. So please proceed then with the continuation of your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Hopefully you're seeing the front page of our presentation. And good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Menike. I am a senior attorney with the Tenant Protection Unit, and I'm joined by my colleague Brittany Taylor, who is also a senior attorney with the Tenant Protection Unit. So there's a couple of things I want to getting a little ahead of ourselves here. So I am going to cover we're going to cover three things, and that is who the tenant protection is, and what we do, and how we do it. So the Tenant Protection Unit. The Tenant Protection Unit is a unique organization in that it is much like DJ was talking about ORA. It is similar but different from the Office of Rent Administration. The TPU began in 2012 and was created under the then Governor Andrew Cuomo. And it was created during the Tenant Protection Act of 2012, which created the Tenant Protection Unit, and it tasked this unit with the responsibility of proactively finding property owners that were in non-compliance or somehow out of compliance with the rent stabilization laws or the rent stabilization code, and then to bring those property owners into compliance with the rent stabilization law and the rent stabilization code. So when we first started out, we really didn't know what our parameters, we were a very immature agency in the sense that we didn't know where our jurisdiction was, but we've had about a good 12 years now 12 or 13 years now to really dig into our jobs and our functions, and we're a team-driven, open door office policy, and we work together with a common goal of preserving affordable housing. We are made up of administrative support staff. We're made up of Excelsior fellows, auditors, investigators, and of course attorneys, because at the end of the day, we are a law enforcement office, and in the sense that we are looking for property owners that are not in compliance with the rent stabilization laws. And we're also a legal office, a law office. So as a law office, as attorneys, we are working cases of all sorts of property owners that are in all sorts of issues related to rent stabilization that Brittany is going to touch on and when she discusses more about what our mission is. So, some of the big differences between ORA and TPU as well is that TPU looks for patterns and practices of bad landlord behavior. So in a sense, the TPU is looking for tenants where the property owner is overcharging all of the tenants versus the property owner is simply maybe just overcharging me. Then that would be an overcharge complaint with the Office of Rent Administration, whereas overcharge issues or any other rent stabilization non-compliance issue, service complaints where it's or other kinds of like lease issues or overcharges or service complaints, harassment, where you're talking about something that's going on throughout a building or portfolio, that's in a case that might be more appropriate for the tenant protection unit. So yes, DJ was saying we have over 1 million rent stabilized apartments throughout the state of New York. Most of them happen to be in the 5 boroughs of New York City. The general building, generally they're going to fall under buildings that have 6 or more units built before 1974 and haven't deregulated for some reason or don't fall under some kind of exception. Now, some properties can still be rent stabilized if they are built post 1974. You have your quid pro quo property tax abatement properties such as 421A, J51 properties. You have your voluntary and mandatory inclusionary housing programs that oftentimes have rent stabilization attached to them. There's other forms of affordable housing that also has rent stabilization attached to it. Rent stabilization, you can find it in a lot of places that you wouldn't expect it. A lot of unusual cases for rent stabilization as well, where you may not expect it. Also look out for your horizontal multiple dwellings or buildings that don't look like they're 6-unit buildings, but they're side by side and each one has 3 units each and together composes a 6-unit building. Those are interesting cases to look out for. So yeah, we're looking out for rent stabilization, rent stabilized properties that may be slipped under the radar, or properties that the property owners don't want to be recognized as rent stabilized, or all litany of types of rent stabilization issues. So we're out there looking for those problems and bring those properties into compliance. So to go a little bit more into that, I'm going to hand it over to Brittany, who is going to talk about what a little bit more specifics about what our mission is.
Thank you, Paul. So as Tom said, we work large portfolios.
Brittany, we're having a little trouble hearing you. Is there a way to improve the audio feed on your end?
Is this better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So as Tom said, we focus on landlords that have large portfolios of rent stabilized apartments. And we cover most non-compliance issues. So that is overcharge complaints, harassment, service issues, whether a unit is rent stabilized at all. The only thing that we really don't look at are major capital improvements, which are rent increases that landlords can get for making building-wide, system-wide improvements. Those are under the jurisdiction of ORA. And we also have a little bit of a manufactured home presence upstate and in Long Island. We provide legal support to make sure that manufactured home tenants are also getting their renewal leases and not being harassed by landlords. So how do we do this? We're part of an intergovernmental task force. So that includes Department of Buildings, HPD, the Attorney General. We will find cases through various ways, often directly from tenants, or through referrals from other government agencies. We work with a lot of nonprofit tenant organizations and public interest law offices like Legal Services, Legal Aid, Communities Resist, and a bunch of others. We do a lot of public outreach like this. And we have a lot of major investigations. We are a pretty responsive agency that allows us to respond directly to tenant issues. And sometimes that might be a referral to make a complaint, an individual complaint with the Office of Rent Administration. Sometimes that might be reaching out to the landlord. Some of our bigger cases, we've been investigating Zara Realty with the Attorney General's office for many, many years. We're currently in litigation to address issues around brokers' fees and other improper fees and improper rent increases. Another major settlement that we just got was with Steve Croman, who was using rent stabilized apartments for short-term rentals on a platform similar to Airbnb. And so we were able to get the landlord to refund those tenants and also return those units to rent stabilization where there are rent stabilized tenants living there. Yeah, I'll pass it back to Tom. Tom, you're muted.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to move on to, how do we achieve results? As you can see, just from this picture alone, like this is just one building out of dozens and dozens and dozens that we visit a month. Uh, as Brittany had touched on, we are part of the intergovernmental task force that is the Department of Buildings, HPD, sometimes the Attorney General's office, almost always the fire department, FDNY, and of course our office. Because when you go, you're essentially identifying problematic buildings in the 5 boroughs in New York. And typically ones that appear on the worst landlord list or any other, or you can also pretty much see which buildings are problematic from HPD's online portal where you can see type of violations that a building has. But anyway, so these types of buildings will typically be on the intergovernmental task force inspection list. And once a week, we go to these buildings and usually address the building from multiple jurisdictions. So you're not just looking at a building from an HCR perspective, you're also looking at it from the Department of Buildings perspective, you're looking at it from HPD perspective, you're looking at it from the fire department's perspective. You can't really see it in here on this picture very well, but you can see some officers on the far ends. They are HPD officers and DOB officers. And we also have interns with us visiting the building. We feel it's important for student interns to see exactly what it is, the conditions that tenants live in on a daily basis, things that we take for granted is denied often to tenants, like a safe locking front door, or in this case here in this building, like a leak, a roof that doesn't leak. This building, for example, like if you were walking on this building, it would be like walking on a water mattress, because there was about a foot of water that was in between the layers of roofing, right? So when we're in a position like that, we can get immediate results, because when the property owner is almost always on site, they'll start immediately taking care of certain issues like this. This is something that should have been taken care of years ago. But nevertheless, it's an example of where we, as a working together with our partners, law enforcement partners, tenants' rights organizations, tenant advocacy organizations, legal service providers, we can get quick results. So this is an example of a case where you're just going out to buildings, but it's not really a legal case. These types of things lead to legal cases, because you might be on an inspection and then you find a situation where the property owner isn't registering the building. DJ had touched on how property owners are required to register the building yearly with DHCR. A lot of times that doesn't happen. So you might run into those issues. You might run into service issues. You might run into harassment issues. You might run into lease violation issues. You might run into overcharge issues, and you might find it throughout the entire building. You find a whole variety of issues in these buildings. You try to tie together motivations and rational thought process to try to understand what the property owner is doing here a lot of the times. And a lot of the times it really doesn't make sense, other than the fact that the property owner just keeps these properties as some kind of bank. And it doesn't really matter even if they're collecting rent a lot of the time. We've run into buildings where you go into the building, no locked door, and the building has no real tenants in there, but there's people just hanging out, doing drugs and playing around and just doing whatever, and there's no actual rental going on. And but the value of the property remains intact. It's still a $15 million property, so who cares whether or not anybody's even paying rent? But anyway, it's just an example of how we achieve results by going out to these properties and identifying problems and being proactive about it to see what's going on out there and trying to bring compliance. And it all starts with starting a conversation. Unlike ORA, we don't write orders and we don't issue judgments. So we're just a law office that's charged with enforcing the rent regulations. So it all starts with, like any other law office, it starts with a conversation with the property owner. Hey, you got this, that, and the other thing going on in your building. We were at your building the other day and we found these issues. Can you please address these issues? 9 times out of 10, that's all it takes. And, the property owner will eventually get into compliance. It's the one time out of 10 where we do have certain law enforcement powers, such as subpoena power, that we can exercise. But even before that, you can use other sorts of power too. You can again, coordinate with your law enforcement partners, see what kind of leverage you can help do to get the property owner into compliance. If it doesn't work out, as Brittany was talking before, you can always sue. You can always go into litigation and get legal compliance. You can always contact the Tenant Protection Unit. We do have an online presence, and you can always email us at tpuinfo@hcr.ny.gov. We also have a form that you can a web form that you can submit intake to as well. Just type in TPU DHCR in Google. It'll come right to our page. Otherwise, you always just email us, and we'll be happy to we're happy to chat with you. I think that might be all we have, Brittany. And we're happy to turn it over. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you to DJ, Tom, and Brittany for your presentation. Definitely provided us a very good overview of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So at this point, we are available for a few minutes to take questions. I see a few in the chat, so we'll get to those in just a second. I just had a quick question, just in terms of enforcement and the role of the tenant in the work that you do. Is it that you are doing your work on behalf of, say, the state, in terms of, any court actions that may be instituted, or are there any situations, you said you operate as a law office, so it's Brittany and Tom, you do. Are you actually operating on behalf of specific tenants? Like, would they actually be their clients, or are you more specifically focused on enforcement?
Great question. Yeah, so we represent the state of New York's interest in preserving rent stabilization. The interests, this interest of like a legal service provider and the tenant protection unit are very similar. They parallel very, very similarly, but there is a point where they diverge, in that we don't directly represent the tenant like a legal service provider does, while we in a sense represent the apartment, while legal services represents the individual.
Understood. Thank you for that. Okay, so we'll turn it over to questions that are out there. First, I do see a raised hand, so let's go to Christopher Robson. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. So sort of similar to that question, I guess I'm just curious, between your two offices, what tools are available, or what kind of monitoring is done for retaliation against tenants who do initiate a complaint against a landlord?
So I can answer on behalf of the Tenant Protection Unit, and then DJ can talk on behalf of ORA, of course. So when we come into a situation where we suspect that kind of thing is happening or may happen, we would go into a written stipulation with an enforceable section of the stipulation. Is going to say, if this continues, this is what the enforcement is going to look like against you, to prevent and deter that very behavior.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you. All right, so I do see some questions in the chat, so why don't we'll ask a few of those questions now. Carl, our chair, asks, so do NYCHA resident escalations and the landlords on the Public Advocate's annual worst landlord list fall under your purview? I know you talked briefly about that, but I guess also as to NYCHA, if you have any comments as to that.
So rent stabilization and NYCHA, or public housing, are two separate housing programs, and our jurisdiction is not NYCHA. NYCHA has jurisdiction over NYCHA. But to the second part of the question, yes, the worst landlord lists, the property owners that are on the worst landlord list often intersect the issues of rent stabilization. Yes, absolutely.
And I'll follow up on that. We do look at the Public Advocate's worst landlord list. So one of the things that TPU does is we audit what's called the legal regulated rent. So the rent that is supposed to be charged to the tenant, and we will we have access to all registrations, so we'll look at the rent registrations in the portfolios of those landlords, And if we see, big increases in those portfolios, that is something that we will, we proactively take a look at those. So we are looking at that.
Very good, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Barton, who says, how does TPU gain access to these buildings? Is it generally by a court order or something else?
Well, a lot of the time you can just walk right in because the property owner hasn't maintained the locks to the building. So that's how 9 times out of 10 we get into the buildings. But no, it's not attached to any kind of court order. Usually it's like I said, I put that email up before and it said tpuinfo@hcr.ny.gov. Somebody, maybe a tenant emails us and say, hey, this is going on in my building. Looks like it's affecting a lot of tenants. That might be something that we would act on. And based on that intake, which can come from one of many, many sources, but based on that intake is maybe something that would motivate us to start a case and go to that building.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, we have one more question in the chat that's from Martin Bergstrom. Just broadly curious, if a building owner isn't renting out units, is that something they can be compelled to do?
Warehousing units. Warehousing units is a big thing. It might be a political issue, but as far as a enforceable rent stabilization issue, it's not an enforceable rent stabilization issue. That's, a property owner is going to warehouse apartments sometimes, and there's nothing really the HCR can do about that, unfortunately. But I do know it's a big political issue, and I do know that there are motivations out there to definitely change that. But so far as the current landscape is, yeah, there's really nothing as far as we can do about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, I see, Christopher, your hand is still up. Okay, just are you still? Okay, all done. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure that was
Sorry
the
about
case.
that.
All right, thank you. Just a little housekeeping there. Okay, I think with that we will conclude this presentation. We're also going to have the presentations to be posted on CB14's website. That was a question as well. So I think we will have that up in a moment. Oh, I see that is it Treasurer may have a question as well. I think that may have been asked earlier, if that's the case.
Treasurer, you're muted if you had a question.
Sorry about that. You could hear me, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to ask, for rent stabilized units, is it anyone could apply? Like, I don't know, I think I saw on the website stating that it's for people who are 62 years old and who are disabled that could apply for rent stabilization, I guess. So if I'm a 30-something-year-old professional, can I still be applicable to apply for such?
That's interesting. You touched on something that's related to rent stabilization. So rent stabilization is simply something that exists,
Yeah.
and you are either lucky enough to live in an apartment that's rent stabilized or not. Rent stabilization is more of a legal analysis using the law to determine what the status of an apartment is. I wish I could tell you there's like a list that automatically figures out which apartments are rent stabilized or not, but there isn't. So it can be that the general rule of rent stabilization is that it's 6 or more units in buildings built before 1974. That's a million plus apartments in the state of New York. So it's a very broad program, and anybody can be rent stabilized. Anyone.
Okay, so 1 second, Thomas.
Yeah,
My
sure.
question, I forget a piece. It actually had to do with rent freeze.
Yes.
Can I apply for rent freeze being a 33-year-old who pays for rent in a rent stabilized building?
So you're talking about SCREE and DREE.
Yeah.
So you have disability rent exemption increase, and you have senior rent increase exemption. So if you're a senior, you can have, or I think 62 meets certain guidelines, or you have a disability and you
Yes.
meet certain guidelines, financial guidelines. Then you can have your rent frozen.
So if I am a 33-year-old or 40-something-year-old, I can't get my rent freeze, no?
Well, you might be able to negotiate something with the property owner as a preferential rent, but that's going to be a hard bargain. They're not going to go for. I mean, that's probably your only thing. Is the closest thing you're going to get to freezing your rent, just as, or if you have a service issue in your apartment and you do a service complaint and you get a rent reduction because you have some kind of existing service issue, and then your rent is frozen until the property owner makes a repair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because I've been hearing about rent stabilization all the time, and
Treasure,
at
we
the end of
really
the day,
appreciate it, but we don't really do back and forths in these contexts. So feel free to call the office tomorrow, and I'm happy to talk you through this. All right? Thank you so much.
oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
you,
you very
Thomas,
much
for
for
your.
joining us. We appreciate it. Okay, at this point, I think we will close our discussion with DJ Tom and Brittany. So thank you all again for your participation this evening. Very good presentation, very helpful, I think, for our community. So thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn festivities over to my co-chair, Melissa Minnick, who will handle the next item on our agenda. So, Melissa, please take it away.
Thank you, Greg. So our next presenter is Tyrone McDonald, and he's the Government and Community Relations Manager from NHS Brooklyn. And he's going to be presenting about the programs that are offered by NHS Brooklyn. And Tyrone, it's all yours.
Sure, thank you very much. It's always a delight to speak and actually present before the community boards, particularly Community Board 14. So just allow me just to share my slides here. Let me find it. Give me 1 minute. This part of me, my computer is just freezing up a little bit. Do apologize. Yeah. Okay. Do apologize. It looks like I'm having a little bit technical difficulty. You know what? Do I have the ability to share? Was I granted that? Share my.
You should.
Okay.
And if you
If I continue to have problems, I'm gonna email you to slide. I should have done it before, but let me just try it again.
Yeah, give it another shot if you made it a presenter.
Okay. For some strange reason, I cannot find that slide. All right, I'm just gonna email it to you then.
Okay. If you want to email it to me and you can start and I'll set it up while you're talking, that's fine.
Sure. Okay. And what email should I use? A CB14?
Yeah, the info at CB14.
Okay, I just sent it off to you. You should be expecting it. It should be arriving in a few moments. Okay. All right, just a little bit about Neighborhood Housing Services, everyone. Neighborhood Housing Services is a 42-year HUD-approved not-for-profit organization. It's our mission to provide resources to underserved areas, and we do this by concentrating on community revitalization through homeownership and also housing preservation. When NHS got started plus years ago, we actually got started on a campaign called the Campaign on Brooklyn. And this was to address the issue of redlining, primarily in African American and Caribbean American and other communities of color. At that particular time, banks and also insurance companies denied loans to homeowners in order to repair their homes. So NHS, got together with the city and other stakeholders and actually provided grants and also loans so many Black homeowners can actually repair their property so that communities will not fall into blight. So that's particularly how we got started. All right, next slide.
Let me figure out. Oh, there we go.
There you go. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. All right. So most of our services concentrate. I mean, when we originally got started, we concentrated more on homeowners, but we have since expanded those services to include first-time home buyers, which is our most popular program, as well as tenants. So for tenants, we provide tenant education and counseling, and that includes an array of services, including issues, tenant and landlord issues. We get a number of tenants who do call our office who want to know the status of their property, whether or not they live in a rent stabilized apartment or not. We also get a number of tenants who call us with or without leases. If they don't have a lease, they would like to know what their rights are. Many tenants is particularly known in Community Board 14 live in, let's say, 3-family units, and they want to know what their rights are in a private home. Individuals who do call us also have issues in terms of rental arrears. That was a very big issue during COVID, when a number of people, fell behind either job loss, whatever the case may be. Individuals call us for various sundry issues with their other roommates, and so forth and so forth. Renters insurance education. I do want to highlight the neighborhood housing services. We see renters insurance education as part of a financial wholeness program. We're not here to sell insurance. So we're not here to sell you State Farm over Geico, over New York Life. But we do want to encourage tenants to get renters insurance as a means of actually protecting themselves financially. Where we hold our tenant insurance workshops, which we give every month, we highlight things. We just cover things such as how premiums are calculated, the jargon used in the field, different types of coverage, and so forth, liability coverage. What's basic coverage? What's a little bit more, luxury items and so forth and so forth. As you know, for the past year, there were a number of fires that actually impacted Brooklyn, and many of those individuals were displaced. They lost a lot of belongings, which ranks up, which probably numbers in the thousands of dollars, which set them back financially. So, when it comes to renters insurance, we do cover, what renters insurance, some of the coverage, how premiums are calculated. We also actually review people's policy as well. So someone can come to office with a declaration page, and we'll go over their policy to see if it's adequate, regarding their personal lifestyle. Homebuyer education. Now, NHS is a HUD-approved homebuyer education counseling agency. So any individual who's looking to buy a home, co-op, or condo, and they don't know how to get started, one of the things we do is every month we do provide free home buying webinars. Matter of fact, we have one going on right now as we speak, where we give you an overview of the home process. So we do discuss getting a mortgage, the different type of mortgages out there. With the home buying process, we do cover some myths, like the myth that you have to have 20% down. We do discuss some of the basics of home buying, like what encompasses a mortgage, how banks actually view clients, the different actors in the home buying process, like a home inspector, the real estate agent, how does a real estate agent differ from a real estate broker? And even when it comes to real estate agent and a broker, due to that, there was a recent ruling recently where from the Supreme Court where home buyers now actually have to pay the real estate agent, whereas before it was the seller who had to pay both, the seller's agent and also the buyer's agent. But buyers now also have to pay if they choose actually to retain a buyer's agent. They have to pay their buyer. So that's making things interesting, and it's basically new. We do talk about it in our workshops, and that's a pretty, is being hashed out right now. But we do cover that. In addition to down payment and closing cost assistance, we do inform many individuals who come to us, whether it's the workshop and or the one-on-one counseling session regarding various down payment and closing cost assistance, whether it's offered by various lenders. There's a popular one offered by the city called Home First, where an individual can get up to $100,000 or 20% of the purchase price, whichever is less. We do go over the guidelines with that because a lot of individuals are seduced by the grant itself, but we do want to emphasize some of the guidelines that you have to adhere to, such as the income guidelines and so forth and so forth. I'll get more into detail with that a little later on. Landlord training, that's a course. We actually all have a offer we're offering free of charge. That's a course open up to both first-time homebuyers and also existing landlords. And these landlords are basically landlords who are small homeowners. Let's say you own a 3, 2, 3, 4 unit, owner occupied, and you rent it out. What we often find out is many landlords are not prepared for the task of renting out their home, and they don't treat it as a business. And that's something we do want to emphasize. In landlord training, we cover things such as screening tenants, finances, having finances to repair, and so forth. We also cover a Fair Housing Act. And if you are planning to rent out your apartment, and you plan to post information on renting your apartment, what are the things you can't say in that ad, whether it's a flyer, a paper flyer, whether it's a Facebook ad. So you can't put something that no one with children are allowed, and actually people actually do that. So we cover that. It's very important because not only is the landlord responsible, but if they actually retain a real estate agent and actually they violate that, the real estate agent, in addition to the landlord, also responsible for any type of these violations. We cover also responsibilities of a landlord and so forth. Given some of the issues with sanitation recently and different things like that. Next slide, please. Next slide. There you go. After someone becomes a homeowner, we also found out that the home buying process, it begins a new chapter in the home buying process. Okay, so we also offer workshops for homeowners, covering things such as property taxes, flood insurance, clean energy, energy efficiency. We're actually having a workshop tomorrow on preparing your home for winter. So we're going to cover that. Home repair and flood protection, financing, emergency preparedness, as far as just having a plan in a case of disaster. Mortgage counseling. Mortgage counseling addresses both foreclosure, which we provide free of charge, and we are a part of HOP, HOPP, which is a homeowner protection program, which is a network of not-for-profits statewide who actually help homeowners who are facing foreclosure, both counseling agencies and also legal. And we represent the counseling agency side. And if any individual needs any legal assistance, if they're facing foreclosure, we do refer them to legal entities free of charge. If homeowners have any questions about refinancing, reverse mortgage, we are also a reverse mortgage counselor, one of the few agencies that actually have a reverse mortgage counselor. We're not here to peddle reverse mortgage, but for some individuals who may have equity a lot of equity but little income, it may be an option to address the financial situation. I mentioned landlord training. They also provide property management. And property management is actually unique because most property management you see is actually geared towards buildings of 6 units or more. What is left out is actually small landlords, those who actually own, let's say, 2 to 4 units, or let's say you have an individual who may own one family or two family is an investment. So we actually, as part of our property management program, collect rent, pay any bills, whether it's the mortgage, utility bills, um, arrange for any type of repairs or any type of maintenance, snow removal, and so forth and so forth. Next slide, please. Okay. Also, we don't in conjunction with, let's say, organizations like Grow Brooklyn, we have estate planning services. What we noticed, and we actually had to evolve as an organization, because once we actually provided foreclosure prevention services, we encountered many complex cases. Same thing with reverse mortgage, where we ran into individuals who, let's say, for example, who had a reverse mortgage, and let's say, for example, one of the spouses died, and let's say the remaining spouse, they were probably on the deed but not in the mortgage. So we have situations like that. We also have situations where, let's say, a family member died, but or a remaining family member, and they died without a will, and the remaining family member was there, paying off the mortgage, and let's say, for example, that the mortgage was in arrears. So we actually had like a lot of very complex and dicey situations. So we felt the need to partner with other organizations to offer estate planning. There are also another situation, which is throughout Brooklyn, where individuals who actually, someone passes away and they actually have heirs, and let's say one of their heirs actually decides to actually sell a portion of their stake in the property to an investor, and that investor, thereby pressures the other family members to actually sell. So we have all these various situations we hear. So we definitely felt the need to have estate planning. We also provide financial education, as I mentioned, disaster preparedness, and also home maintenance training, which is actually a popular do-it-yourself program currently offered at the Flatbush Y on Flatbush and Rogers, where we actually offer do-it-yourself classes on home repair. So we cover things as installing tiles, installing sheetrock, repairing sheetrock, plastering, installing toilets. That's more in the level 2, which deals with more plumbing and electrical. But with the level 1, we talk about installing studs, safety tips, what basic tools you should have, in your home repair kit, and the like. All right, and that's a 7-week course, which currently meets at the Y. Next slide, please. Okay, we have office in East Flatbush and also Canarsie, and we just opened one in Coney Island recently. It's 718-469-467, and also you can go to our website for further information. So I know I have a few minutes left. If you can unshare this for the moment, because I do want to talk about an initiative that we also have with the Department of Health. So this should work, because this was actually on. There it is. Okay, let me scroll up. All right, I'm not going to go through all of this because it's actually quite lengthy, but Neighborhood Housing Services, we also have various partners, is a service provider, one of which is Department of Health. And as part of our home buying services, we also have the challenge of many individuals, who do come to us. They do come to us with many needs. So a lot of times when they come to us with foreclosure information, they may have also estate planning issues that need to be addressed. And likewise, when individuals do come to us with either foreclosure tenant issues, they may have other issues that also needs to be addressed. So I'm not going to go through this whole entire thing, but I just want to go to some of the relevant referrals that we actually make that actually address particularly homeowners, right, that we see. Often individuals who come to us, emergency assistance for housing. Now, NHS does not provide like a emergency assistance for housing, but any individual who do come to us, we do certainly, send them to various home bases to deal with that. If they getting an eviction, let's say they came to us late and, their wits ended and want to know what to do. We actually, do work with various clients for various rental, let's say the one-shot deal, to address any arrears. An interesting thing when it comes to the one-shot deal and arrears, one-shot deal can not just used for just rent, but it can also be used for utilities and even some cases for homeowners. We have individuals who are homeowners who have been behind in their mortgage. Let's say, for example, particularly during COVID, they resumed employment and they still had these arrears. So we actually were able to use the one-shot deal tech to address those things as well. All right. So it wasn't the one-shot deal was not something we just used strictly for just rental arrears. Okay. All right. Also, oftentimes, many individuals, both tenants and also homeowners, come to us for home energy assistance program, which is HEAP, which actually helps pay your heating and also energy utility bills, during the cold months. But they also have a cooling program in which to help pay for, let's say, air conditioner. They do have income guideline during the summertime. They do have income guidelines, but oftentimes, I just want to make you aware of this because a lot of times individuals, may have these particular issues as well. Okay. All right. Other issues that people come to us, I did mention rental assistance. There's also the FEPS program, which stands for Family Homelessness Prevention Program. FEPS is like a citywide or city level peer or of the Section 8 program for families with children on cash assistance who basically are in a shelter or in the process of being evicted, where they actually pay 70% of your rental arrears and you have to cover 30%. Thing with FEPS though is that FEPS, you have to be in a program for about 4 years, with the exception if somebody's a senior or disabled, where you can, be in that program for perpetuity. The thing is you have to, recertify every year. Now, things with FEPS is that you may not know that the city council actually override the mayor's veto for providing FEPS. You don't have to be in a shelter because before, in order to get shelter, a person had to be in a shelter for about 90 days. And the city council actually wanted to help speed up assistance to people. So individuals who may, before they even get to the shelter, they could provide assistance, but the mayor has not um, enacted that what the city council wanted. So there's currently a lawsuit regarding that. But as it stands, with FEPS, you can actually, it's also like a rental assistance program. I mentioned shelters and also home base, which actually and there's various home bases throughout Brooklyn, which we actually connect people to if they need that assistance, whether it's FEPS or other tenant services. And keep in mind, home base is strictly based on neighborhood. So, and it's divided among a few organizations such as Canva, Catholic Charities, Riseboro is one, a couple other ones as well. NIS 311 for that. Okay. All right. So, thank you for your attention. I'm just going to take a little time to actually, you can actually use the scan, for any feedback. I would greatly appreciate that. So I can get credit for this workshop. I'm just going to leave it on for a couple of seconds.
You're welcome to leave it up while we take questions as well.
Sure. Okay, great. And I am open for questions. Go right ahead. Greatly interested.
Thank you, Tyrone. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, there's a lot of great information that you just shared. But please, if there's anybody who does have questions or would like to know more. I know in the meantime, I actually do have one.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so could you share just a little bit more information, even just a bit of an overview maybe about that Home First program?
Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. So what if you can actually I would greatly appreciate if you can get me back to the PowerPoint that I sent you. I'd be happy to talk about Home First, the golden boy of home buying in New York City. So you can get me on. Let me stop this slide here. Let me stop this.
Your presentation should be up now. Just tell me what page it's on.
Oh, okay. For some strange reason, I don't see it. Let me see. Maybe yeah, there it is. Okay. It is go further down. I can't remember the page. Go. I'll let you know when to stop. Continue. Next page. Next page. Next page. All right. Next page. Next page. Next page. Next page. Next page. Next page.
This one?
Yep. Home First. All right. Home First. All right. Home First is actually a grant offered by HPD, which is they are the administrator, and it's a down payment closing cost assistance program where you have to live in New York City. What is open to if an individual is buying a 1 to 4 family co-op or condo, the home. If it's a 1 to 4 family, particularly if a 2 to 4 family, it must be owner occupied. Okay, so you can't buy an investment. Now, a person can get up to 100K or 20% of the purchase price, whichever is less. So if a person was, let's say, buying a home for 600,000, 20% of that would be 120,000. So you would not get 120,000, you get the 100,000 since that's the cap. All right. But if you were buying, let's say, a house for, let's say, 400,000, right, 20% of that would be 80,000. You'll get the 80,000. So that's basically in a nutshell using easy roundable numbers. All right. There are income guidelines. I'm going to go into the chart afterwards. The home buyer must complete a home buyer education course from a HUD approved agency. NHS is one of them. There's others out there. Jonathan's is also one of them. Also a couple other organizations throughout there. So you have to complete that prior to you closing. And you also have to have 3% of your own monies for the down payment. So the question I'm often asked is, if this is a down payment and closing costs, then why do I need my own money? The reason being for this program is that you apply you apply for this program when you're in contract, right? In order for you to be in contract, you actually have to offer a down payment to the seller's attorney so they can actually hold on to it to actually initiate the whole home buying process. So that's the reason why. All right. And oftentimes a seller of a property is not going to take a buyer seriously unless they have something to hold on to, is a good faith, is a good faith prospect. So hence the reason why you have to at least 3%. All right. Of your money for the down payment. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Some other guidelines for this program is the loan must be from a participating lender, and there's like a list of lenders that HPD have. Some of the lists are basically some of the standard banks that you have: Citibank, Bank of America, TD Bank, MCU, Chase, Astoria, and the list. Anything I missed? Number of banks, but they're usually depository banks. Okay, so you can't use, let's say, Rocket Mortgage, Quicken Loans to to get your loan from them. So just keep that in mind. You also have something called a housing quality standards home inspection before closing. Now, at NHS, we often encourage individuals to actually get a home inspection prior to closing, and your home inspector should know what a housing quality inspection is. Okay. So basically, NHS or whatever organization you work with are the ones that submit your application. And it's actually a forgivable loan. Grant is offer a marketing term, to entice people but it's a forgivable loan. The reason why it's a forgivable loan is depending on the size of the mortgage. So if, let's say, for example, a person has a mortgage of 40,000, which most likely will probably be a subsidized co-op, all right, you have to stay in that home for 10 years. Once you reach the 10-year mark, then whatever assistance you got from Home First is forgiven. Anything more than 40,000, which will probably be the realistic, idea for New York, if you're purchasing, you have to stay in the house for 15 years. And at the 15-year, that loan is forgiven. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide should be the income guidelines, I gather. Okay. So here's some of the income guidelines. All right. And this is as recent as June 1st, 2024. So it's pretty recent. So if you're in a 2-person household, that means you and, let's say, a spouse, or let's say you a dependent. If you're a single parent, you can't make more than $99,550. So if you're in a 3-person household, you can't make more than $111,950. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to the family size, is basically the family who will be moving in the property, not necessarily who's currently with you now. Is you have many families who actually live, currently maybe saving money, maybe living with other relatives. So always keep that in mind. The family size is basically the individuals who are planning to live in the property, and they do take the income of all those individuals. Okay. So could you, so anybody has any questions regarding Home First? And also, one thing I neglected to add, you can actually use Home First in conjunction with other grants, just provided that you meet the guidelines for all of them. All right. At NHS, we, various lenders offer down payment assistance and closing costs. Is not as much as Home First, but it may be, let's say, 5,000, 8,000 here or there. Also, if you plan to get like a Sony May mortgage, and Sony May stands for State of New York Mortgage Association, which is basically a mortgage product offered by the state of New York. They have a down payment assistance program of 15,000. So they have their own guidelines. Some of the income guidelines are similar, but you can actually use that in conjunction with Home First as well. This is what
Well, thank you for all of that, Tyrone.
Sure.
I'm not, actually, I do see a question now.
Sure.
Jarrell?
Yeah, hi Tyrone. Just want to say thank you for the presentation. NHS is doing some great work. I've interfaced with y'all a few times in my own work, so I just want to say thank you for the presentation. Specifically for Home First, I'm not sure if I missed it, but is this program for all of state of New York, or specifically New York City? Because I'm just looking at the family size and income levels, and I'm just wondering, like, who would be able to like afford like a home in New York, just like I've seen housing prices for like over $1 million. So I just would like to know, like what have you been seeing with the success of this program? Who's been able to use it? Where have been able to find housing?
Yeah, you know what? We have seen a success with the program, but to answer your first question, is Home First is actually limited to the 5 boroughs. Okay, it's actually limited to the 5 boroughs. So let's say if you were buying Nassau County or Westchester, it would not apply. It's only limited to the 5 boroughs since HPD is managing it. And you're right, we have seen success for the program, but it is very difficult. The problem with Home First and some of the limitations with Home First, even though the 100,000 is very enticing, is some of the income guidelines. And the reason being is that the source of the money comes actually from HUD. And that's one of the limitations with it, is that being that the source of money comes from HUD, HUD, and we're using like some of HUD's guidelines when you deal with a coastal city like New York, it which has like a higher cost of living, it causes a lot of problems. We actually have seen success for it, but we wish it was a little greater. It's almost kind of like trying to like fit, trying to fit, let's say, like an egg into a square peg, and we have to do like a lot of maneuvering oftentimes, the staff to make it work. So we have seen success, but it is quite difficult, honestly, because of the income. That's one of the biggest challenges, some of the income.
Yeah, I know. Oh,
Particularly with homes, particularly with homes is a challenge.
yeah, we definitely have to do something about the AMI. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll add about that, I know that the mayor, or what HPD wanted to do was, and they need a state approval for it, is they actually wanted the state to grant HPD the ability to, let's say, source its own grants, because HPD can't do that currently. That's a limitation. And once, but they would need to adjust some state laws to do that. That's what the mayor wanted to do. I have to see whatever became of it. I don't think it ever went through. But if that were ever happened, then HPD would have a lot of latitude as far as setting like income guidelines when it comes to grants, because we have to follow what the feds follow when it comes to Home First. So,
Great. Well, thank you for that, Tyrone.
yeah.
And thank you for your entire presentation.
Anytime.
I see you've dropped the link to your organization there in the chat.
Absolutely.
So
I'll do that, right?
people would like to find out more, you can go to nhsbrooklyn.org. And with that, I'd like to introduce, we do have one more speaker for tonight. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Goss, who's the Director of Neighborhood Preservation Services at the Housing and Family Services of Greater New York. And he's going to be speaking about updates on good cause eviction rules. Jonathan, please, I promise we've not forgotten about you. So thank you for sticking with us tonight.
That's okay. Good evening, everybody. My name's Jonathan Goss from Housing and Family Services of Greater New York. I'll make it quick because I know I'm on the clock. We were founded back in 1971 by the former Senator and Borough President, Marty Markowitz. We were known back then as the Flatbush Tenants Council. Basically, we've just added people, subtracted people, and we are now known as Housing and Family Services of Greater New York, which means we are covering all 5 boroughs, including the forgotten, never forgetting Flatbush. We do a mortgage foreclosure prevention, where we counsel people and speak to their servicers about their mortgage to have modifications done for their homes so they can stay in them. And on the landlord tenant side, we cover everything else but find you a new place to move to and give you money where you are, probably the 2 things everybody wants. But anything covering your leases, DHR paperwork, the frozen rent application you heard earlier, screen and DRE, we do that. If it's affecting you as a tenant, we deal with it. The reason you actually have the good cause eviction law, and now I'm going to hope, as a person who's used to doing live rather than on video, I'm going to hope that can you all see my screen?
Not yet on my end, at
Not
least.
yet. Uh-oh. That's not good.
Jonathan, if you want to do the same thing and email us the presentation, I'm happy to put it on
Okay.
the screen.
Hold on.
We can vamp.
Then give me 1 second. Where'd it go? Folder.
While Jonathan is doing this, I will just say that thank you, like on behalf of the community board office, thank you to all of the presenters. And also, these are all agencies that we make referrals to. So often when you call the community board and are like, I am having this issue, I don't understand, my landlord is doing X, Y, and Z, we will call these organizations and agencies. We think really highly of them. That's also why we invited them today. So just know that if you're like, I can't remember what that place was called, what was it? If you ever need to call the community board office, we're always happy to put you in touch. How's that for vamping?
CB14. Uh,
And Jonathan, if you have no luck, I think we're going to be sharing your presentation as well. So if you'd like to proceed with your presentation as is, that's also fine.
no. Send everybody. One. There you go. All right,
All
you
right,
should have
I
it.
got it.
Okay.
So you start and I'll just put it up on the screen as you're talking.
Okay. Let me give the good news, bad news, do it the good news, bad news way. The bad news. When COVID hit, it shut down the court system, as everybody knows. About 2 months before they reopened, they had a meeting on how they were going to do a soft open, how the courtrooms would be set up, how they intended to work everything. They were about 25,000 cases behind. That was back in 2021, 22. What they've now done is the following. They've allowed tenants and landlords not only to submit, but to answer court notices online. In the beginning, they allowed people to answer cases by phone. So if you got a non-payment notice or a holdover notice and you needed to pick a day, they allowed you to do that by telephone. They had operators on. Slowly but surely, they started going back to the old system where you had to go in person. But they understood that they still needed to play catch up. So now what they've said is instead of you having 5 days to answer that first notice you get for housing court, you now have 10 days. Instead, if heaven forbid you get a marshal's notice and you had 7 days to answer it, now you have 14 days to answer. Currently, I know a bill earlier, the beginning of the year, was introduced for the smaller homeowners because they were now running into mortgage issues because they couldn't pay their mortgages because tenants weren't paying their rent, which in part resulted to the ERAP program. But like I said, the city council beginning of the year got a bill that wants to sort of divide the housing court. So if you're a smaller homeowner, somebody that's in a 2 to 5 family and you're renting, give them the ability to move you into housing court a little faster, although still having to follow the same rules for court. You still had to serve notice, you still have to have the hearing, you still have to be in front of a judge to try and settle. Have to see how that one's going to play out. But our organization being in business as long as we were fortunate enough to have a former housing court judge give us a short explanation and presentation on the paperwork we got from the Legal Aid Society. Thank you very much to them. This is going to be the highlights. If you have any questions, because my time runs out, I did put my contact information in the chat, so please feel free to reach out. Again, you can feel free to take a copy of this and present it. Initially, the first thing that was pointed out to us is, as you see on page 1, who does the new law protect when we're talking about the good cause eviction law? The very next line under that says, you are covered by the new law only if, and it's if you do not live in a condo or co-op building. If your building was bought before 2009 and was not rehabbed after 2009. What tended to happen is, as most people know, tenant moves out of a building, landlord will gut renovate it, try to get as much increase on the rent as possible. Well, thanks to the 2019 change in the law, that's kind of stopped, which now why you heard earlier, well, is the landlord warehousing? Unfortunately, the law still has not caught up to the time in that case as well. If you live in a building with 11 or more apartments, if you live in a building that's 10 units, but your landlord owns another building, that becomes interesting because you're now moving into the rent stabilization category where people, if you're signing 1 or 2 year leases, you are required to be for rent stabilization in a property that's 6 or more units where the owner does not live. And as you can see, that's the next one, where your owner does not live in the building. One of the last bullet points and the question that has come up: your rent is under 245% of the fair market value. That's become issue number one. How do you figure out and who's using the clause for being under the fair market value? I don't have to tell you what the rents are in Flatbush. So imagine trying to figure that out as you go from Williamsburg to Sunset Park. And if you'll go to page 2, please. Is it here? Yes. Where the rent in the middle, where the rent increases have been limited. It says you are not supposed to, if you are offered a new lease after April 20th with an amount higher than 8.2, you should tell your landlord that there is a new law. That ends up being a very interesting reality because depending on the size of the building where you are, is whether or not the landlord is going to attempt to terminate the lease, because you're now going to be haggling over the rent increase based on this. Most of the time, this law should move over and cover all of your rent stabilized tenants that are signing 1 or 2 year leases. Because as you can see, it says, does the new law apply to small landlords? No, the law does not cover small landlords, which is, again, a small landlord is defined as a landlord that owns 10 or fewer units of housing, or a unit of housing where they're a single family house. That's still under the private house ruling. So depending on the size of the building, whether or not the landlord lives there, and how long, believe it or not, how long you've lived in the building, is whether or not this will affect you. But for the most part, it should cover everyone that's in a rent stabilized apartment that's more than 6 units. There are going to be some questions to the people that are in the 6 to 10 range, because again, you'd have to confirm what their status is. This law usually does not cover NYCHA, even though it's saying that it does. As everybody knows, NYCHA has its own set of regulations and its own set of rules. So depending on what happens there, is the outcome. And depending on what the landlord is actually, as I like to say, what story he plans on telling to the court. The landlord still has to give good cause to evict you. Next page, please, which is the last. He can still serve you if you haven't been paying. That's a non-payment of rent. If they're claiming that you are doing and performing an illegal activity, selling drugs, noise, they're still going to need proof of that. They're still going to need to have records, other tenants, stating that yes, they have unfortunately seen these actions taking place. And even then, the landlord's going to not have 30 days to start the case, but they're going to have 90 days to tell you why they're starting the case. So that was one of the other changes that has happened, is they've now not only have to give you a 90-day notice if they're not renewing the lease and stating what the reasons are, but they also have to give you a 30-day reminder as well. Wherever the law applies, there is now an attached rider to your lease. Every landlord has been required to now submit that rider. It's about 10, 12 pages. I have seen a couple of copies, mostly in the bigger buildings that we're in, because we tend to go out, and usually we're doing this standing in a lobby full of people talking about this, and getting in isn't a problem. Doors are open, or you ring a couple of intercoms and you're able to get in. We hold a meeting right there in the lobby. This has been a very challenging time for tenants. It's almost like they tried to balance the scale, and they really gave the tenants more time, but there are less programs available for them to catch up on the rent. Some of the judges are sympathetic, some are not. It all depends who you are in front of at the time. 10 different housing court judges will give you 10 different answers. And as a guy who's been in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Staten Island, it's been interesting to see how it plays out. But the most important thing I would tell anybody, check your lease. If you get a notice to somebody, if you get a notice from your landlord, show it to somebody, whether it's an elected, the community board, our organization. Get it out there, because even though they've given you a little more time to answer, it's still not just the landlord's apartment, it's your home, and it needs to be protected. Questions, as I tried to keep it under 8 o'clock.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Yeah, please. Anybody have questions? Terrell, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if that's from earlier or if you do have another question. Looks like Greg
I think it was
also
from
has his hand
earlier.
raised. Okay.
Again, I know that was rushed. I apologize, but I know Tyrone does a great job and a great presentation, so I don't mind losing out to him on this one. I'll get him next time. But again, I put my information in the chat. Please know that this does come from Legal Aid, the Legal Aid Society. They've referred people to us. We referred people to them. So if anything is needed, if you have any other questions, if anybody, again, feel free to distribute this to all the members that need it or ask it. If we do outreach and presentation, so if you know of a school, senior center, you're part of a committee at a church, you want to hear about us, even Board 14, we're more than happy to come back and talk again to anybody that wants it.
Jonathan, do you have time for 2 questions, or are you like on the clock and have to go now?
I'm on your clock, so.
Okay, great. You want to get Greg's question, and then I have one as well?
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I apologize, Jonathan. That was me up front trying to administer our typical time frame there. So I apologize if you felt rushed in any way. So I just have 2 quick questions. So the first one was hearing about and seeing the list here in terms of what qualifies as good cause. Just in what you're seeing so far, do you see a material difference in terms of, you said that the judges, it varies, but do you see material difference as a result of this legislation in terms of perhaps providing additional protections? And then just related to that, is sort of what is the I guess current climate in terms of, I know legal aid prepared this document, in the overall I guess overall climate in terms of legal representation for tenants, in housing court. Has this offered any improvement in that, or is it pretty much the same? And if it is, what is the climate? I'm sort of curious on that in terms of what
I
kind of
have,
representation tenants receive.
okay. I have a saying. If I can keep my tenants out of the court building and I don't have to go and talk to a judge, then I'm doing my job. I have found recently that judges are starting to tighten the belt a little because tenants are unfortunately walking in claiming I owe $10,000 and they're not presenting any proof, any way of saying this is how it's going to get paid. They're just asking for more time. It's always, if a tenant walks into court with owing $10,000, walks in with a money order for $1,000 and a letter from a charity saying we're going to give him $6,000, judges might sign that order to show cause because they're showing an ability to pay. If they go to try to apply for a one-shot deal owing $10,000, they stand a better chance of getting the one-shot deal granted if they have 5,000 than if they have nothing, because then the agency is going, okay, we know they're making an effort not to be back in this situation. So that's number one. The second thing I've noticed is, believe it or not, the landlord's attorneys are a little more receptive when I send letters to them, because as an agency that's been doing this, they know, hey, they went, they got help, they're working. So yeah, maybe I'll grant the first adjournment because they're working. Or you know what? The tenant sent in a year's worth of rent payments. Let me have somebody in the landlord's office go through them. It lightens their court calendar as well. So that's less that they have to deal with. I presently think judges are getting, like I said, a little harder because they want to see that the tenant is working, that the tenant is doing something to alleviate that debt, that they're not just hoping or going, just shopping around trying to come up with the money to pay. Whether it's from a charity, whether it was from ERAP, whether it's from FEPS, that they're working towards maintaining their home. I also have seen that they're giving more of an explanation when they're denying an order to show cause. You know, I've come to see that just an X through the order when I ask what did the judge say is, I don't know, I couldn't read it. Judges are giving more details, and believe it or not, tenants are asking more questions. I've noticed the tenants are being a little more proactive when they're in court. They're not just, they're asking the question, why did this happen? I need to be able to tell somebody something when I go back to see them.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I jump in and ask my question now? I have many. I thank you so much. Can you just tell us, so you've said order to show cause a number of times.
Yes.
What is, for those of us who have never interacted with housing
Okay.
court, what is an order to show cause?
Okay. I'll explain it the best way I know how. A landlord takes you to court. you sign what's called a stipulation. That's an agreement between you and the landlord. The landlord's going to do something, you're going to do something. When one side does not do something, for example, the tenant does not pay, they are in what the court considers default, which means you signed this agreement, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. If you are really a bad tenant, you get a marshal's notice. Your way of stopping the marshal's notice in telling the court not to evict you, you had a good reason for what happened, why you couldn't follow the agreement, is that order to show cause. On the other side of the table, the attorneys, when the agreement is broken and they want to bring the tenant in, they call that a motion. That's their version of going, hey, the tenant didn't do what we asked, we're bringing them back because. So that's why when I say order to show cause, that's the tenant's motion, is that order to show cause. The tenant doesn't have any legal standing in the court to file a motion. That's for attorneys. So for tenants, they file order to show causes.
Great. And then a super quick question, which is, you mentioned this rider that's supposed to be attached to leases. If people get a new lease and they think that they should be covered by good cause and they don't receive a copy of the rider, is there anywhere they can make a complaint to?
They can actually make the complaint to DHCR.
Great. I'm done. I mean, I
And
have more, but I won't take up everyone's time.
the first thing I would tell any tenant is, if they're unsure as to whether or not they are rent stabilized, they're entitled to the eviction clause and the eviction rider that should be attached to their lease, they should reach out to DHCR, see what their status is as a tenant, and go from there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan.
You are very welcome. Again, it's it's the Boy Scout committee person. When the leader says we're stopping at X, you want to try and get as much in as possible. So I would have, if the committee wants me to come back and do it again, I would have no problem with that at all.
Yes, we may. Yeah, again, my my apologies, but because this is
None
a very
noted.
important topic, and I think it's important for tenants to understand what these new rules and are, and how they can impact them if they find themselves in this in these sorts of situations. So thank you, Aldo, for this primer at for this round, and we certainly may invite you back again.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Melissa, if you'd like, I'll just wrap things up at this point. I believe that does conclude our.
Sorry,
Oh,
Greg, there's one
one
more
more
thing.
thing. Of course, yes.
Sean asked that we announce that there is a hearing that is being held on Wednesday, December 11th, about New York City's access to universal legal services for tenants facing eviction. So this is, my understanding, is an extension of the right to be represented in housing court, which we had, I think, Flatbush Tenant Coalition spoke about at a previous meeting. So you're welcome to reach out to the office. We'll share the notice with you. How's that?
I appreciate that. Thank you for that, because that was certainly one of my questions as well, in terms of where things stand with that. Okay. The only thing I'll just say before we wrap up, then, I know we have a new business section, and so usually it's just there just in case, but I'll just open that up just generally for new business, because I know for the last year or so this committee has been very much occupied by City of Yes, and well, essentially just that. And so now we have the opportunity to expand expand our realm and sort of make sure that we're serving all the issues that are out there that cover housing and land use. So I open it up to our committee members, certainly to reach out to the board office, to reach out to either of us, Melissa or myself, to sort of talk about future presentations that they feel are would be helpful with to present in this forum. So I just open it up to everybody in that regard to consider. All right. With that, then, I will say that thank you very much to all. Thanks to all of our speakers tonight. Thank you for those who are still on. And hopeful that all the conversations we had tonight have been informative and helpful. So for now, I'll say thank you again and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Wonderful time.